The next scene is Ahsoka Tano walking. Now I timed this as well, and I did not do this for the whole show because it became impossible because there were so many time problems with this. Even my kids started to get, once I pointed it out, my kids who are 8 and 11 began to become very infuriated with the pacing of the show as well. They would sit there and stare. They're like, nothing happens. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. I'm like, correct. So even my kids, could see that this is a problem. So I wrote, this is what happens. Ahsoka approaches temple. It takes 1 minute and 2 seconds for her to do this. In Indiana Jones, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, it took him about 6 seconds. He finds it. He takes sand, and he's doing something. He's putting sand in the bag, and he's like, don't worry, stick close to me. And then he goes in. Took him 6 seconds to get in there and gave you a little plot point, which will become important later when he switches the idol with the sandbag. It's her walking for 1 minute and 2 seconds. I'm sorry, but in a show, that is an eternity to have no new content where all I can explain is that she's approaching the temple. That's an amateur mistake by all accounts. Amateur filmmakers will do that, and amateur filmmakers will sometimes think that the costumed individual is so awesome to look at that we want to stare at it for 1 minute and 2. We don't care that much. The filmmakers and the costume makers might really like this, but as viewers, we need to know the story. We need to move it along. This should have been edited. They should have cut almost 50 seconds out of this approach of the temple. And that's just the approach.
That kind of thing I think about, especially coming after our conversation with Star Trek V. And I suppose this is from hanging around with Brianna and her discussion of directing so often that I felt like from Star Trek V, we talked about some things in there that I felt like these are director mistakes. Of course, that was William Shatner who was doing this. I was like, there's some things in here that the director should have caught and things like that. I also felt that way with Ahsoka here, that I was like, I'm watching some things that the director should have stopped or edited out or fixed the delivery of lines and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, this is really the director who I think is supposed to be fixing a fair bit of this. There's the writing too, but
I think you're directing too. You are. I don't think you're right. I know you're right. There are directorial problems with this, and I hate saying it because I am have always been a huge fan of Dave Filoni. What he did with the Clone Wars and Rebels was nothing short of spectacular, given the everyone else's efforts, which is very minimal. Even Favreau with Mandalorian, there was some dry parts to that, but it was still good. But even then, there was some filler in the Mandalorian that I was surprised to see. But there is a lot of filler in this, a lot of filler.
These 2 episodes should have been 1 episode.
It should have been 1 episode.
It should have been 1 hour-long episode.
Right. Instead of an hour and 45 minutes, this should have been a 38-minute episode tops. You could, and I'm not kidding, if you trimmed, like a lot of times there'd be dialogue like, what do you think? What do you think? Dude, edit out 6 seconds there. You could do that in between all the dialogue over and over and over again. You will literally chop out 20, 30 minutes just in between dialogue. You know what I'm saying, Heath? Yeah. Even with the cultists, you have to deliver. There's a certain timing to dialogue, right? There's in comedy, there's a certain timing to the back and forth. This lacked all of that nuance.
A very important part of this is that, when you're talking about dialogue, it's extremely important to think about how long it takes to say something.
Well, have you ever seen the movie? No. Nice. I was like, man, he's taking a lot. Oh, I get it. Man, that's great. Have you ever seen Birdman?
I have. It's been a while, but I have seen Birdman, yes.
Well, there's a scene in there where they're reading a script. It's Ed Norton and Michael Keaton, and Ed Norton is like the savant. He memorizes the script the first time, and he's like, what is he really saying there? He goes, I think that's an F-U. He's like, so say it like that. So what they're doing is they're looking at the lines, and they're trying to figure out the subtext so they know the emotional content to deliver lines and go back and forth. And once they got that subtext right, the scene pops on stage, and the 2 characters are really happy with their work. That's part of acting. That's part of directing. That's part of the thespian experience. You always hear about comedic timing. You have to be able to know when to do the punchline the right way. There's a lot of nuance to these things, and that's what actors do. That's what directors know. And you should be able to look at a scene and say, is all of this coming through? What is the subtext? Zero. I felt there was zero subtext. I think there was supposed to be this idea that there was tension, let's say. Tension, generic tension between the characters. So what do? And this is like 101, according to, again, amateurism, in my opinion. Tension between you two. That's not defined. So what do? You have a character goes, and the other character's like, like that's not, you're not giving me anything. I get, if you want tension, we need to know what kind of tension. We need to know what their backstory is, and you can convey more tension in back and forth dialogue. You know how much tension is in some of the Quentin Tarantino scenes, and they're not even talking about the relevant issues. They're talking about cheeseburgers and foot massages. That's a genius. That's someone who understands nuance and background and the function of the scene to get all of that across. And here you have two characters saying lines with generic tension, and that's about as far as it gets. And that's pretty much all these two episodes had. Out of the three lead actresses, I think Sabine Wren was the best acting, but I'm talking like, I give these guys all D minuses, and I would probably give her a C minus. But
I would agree that the actress who plays Sabine is probably the best, but they were still. James says, when you know what you're looking at, it becomes second nature to be able to call out what's directorial versus writer error. And I think there is writer error too, because it's just too long. I mean, you could have condensed scenes and we put this together, but yeah.
Totally. Like there's like writer error. Actually, I had to stop myself because it started to get so irritating. Ahsoka has a line that says, I don't understand. What is it? I don't understand why things have to be so hard. And I'm like, that's a line in the script. I don't understand why things have to be so hard. You used to be a Padawan of Anakin Skywalker. You led clone armies into massive planetary invasions. The Jedi Order turned against you, and you became a fugitive. You left the Jedi Order behind with a big moral stand, which turned out to be correct. You don't understand why things have to be so hard. Is it a problem if it's hard for you? Like, I don't know. Like, it's such a dumb line. And by the way, there was a bunch of those lines in the show, but that's an example of a writing problem on top of the director's problem, where you have two people delivering dialogue like this with generic tension in between. Very poorly done, in my opinion.
James says, sounds like the prequels, lines delivered either flatly or wryly and given zero subtext. You are my brother, Anakin. I loved you. Like, no, you didn't. I saw you. You antagonized him for 3 films.
Totally. That's actually great. See, here's a great point of flaws in filmmaking, but brilliance in functionality. I think the reason the prequels were able to be saved by the Clone Wars animated series is because there was a functional world there that the 3 2-hour films didn't quite capture, but the long form storytelling of 7 seasons of the Clone Wars really fleshed out. So the function was there and the world was there. And when I saw the Clone Wars animated series, I was like, this is what the sequel should have been. For example, there was a scene. This was the scene that sold me on the Clone Wars. There's a scene where they're in a Republic Venerator class ship, right? And they're approaching a planet. And they're like, this is a planetary-wide invasion. And there's 3 of these Star Destroyer-looking things. And Anakin is on the bridge, and it looks like a Star Destroyer bridge, and he's standing next to Admiral Yularen, which I think James mentioned earlier. And he's got his hands behind his back, and he's looking out those triangular windows. And I was like, oh, my God. Like, the Republic was really turning into the Empire. And now they're in the Clone Wars. They're behaving like the Empire. The series brought that home. There's even scenes with Obi-Wan Kenobi standing on the bridge of what appears to be a proto-Star Destroyer in a commanding pose, looking out the windows, observing space battles. I'm like, all the Jedi were almost miniature Darth Vaders for a while in the clone. I mean, they're coming into these planets and there's clone troopers behind them. I'm like, that's what Darth Vader does. So the animated series just captured my imagination with the good Empire, and it looks awfully similar. But they're the good guys. They're compassionate. There's a lot of differences, but the look is very similar. That's my point about functionality. Lucas envisioned all of this, and when you took the time to unpack it and spread it out, it still worked, and there were some incredible stories in there. But when it comes to directing and dialogue, there are long swaths of the prequels that are unbearable to watch. There's some good stuff in there.
I have not been kind to the prequels. I know that a lot of people after the sequel trilogy have looked back on the prequels and thought that they're much better than they were remembered. But even at the time, I didn't think they were all that great. I remember I saw the Phantom Menace a few times, but it seemed like most of the people in my circle then weren't huge fans of them. And I even remember after the third one, I remember having a discussion about it and thinking that it was not that great with my aunt and uncle like outside. And my uncle said, well, at least it's over. We could not have been more wrong. But I remember that being the feeling about the prequels at the time. And I hadn't watched them since. I only had seen the Revenge of the Sith once in theaters. And like 2 years ago, I watched it again. I was like, you know what? Because I was sitting here painting stormtroopers. And so I watched it. I said, I'm just going to watch them again and just see if they remember it. But I didn't think they were anything. They were what I remembered them being.
Well, there were things I liked about. I mean, I did not like them either. Just to be upfront, I liked Revenge of the Sith, but even Revenge of the Sith had a lot of the same problems with the dialogue, the woodenness of the characters, and the bizarre dialogue, and things that just like Revenge of the Sith or Attack of the Clones. I think is the worst offender. Like the love scenes were oh my God, they were so bad. Like. I'm haunted by the kiss you should have never given me. Even now, I want to close my ears because like I can't absorb that.